After 12 relentless years, pouring every ounce of my energy into Sterling Logistics, I had finally done it. The company my father founded, the one I pulled back from the brink and rebuilt, was officially valued at $75 million. Tonight's dinner, filled with extended family and key business associates amidst the elegant backdrop of our Chicago home, was supposed to be a celebration of that milestone. A celebration of our success, my success. Instead, as dessert plates were cleared, my father, Richard Sterling, beamed, resting a proud hand on my younger brother Daniel's shoulder. He looked directly at me, his smile wide, paternal, utterly oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the bomb he was about to drop. "Ava," he announced, his voice resonating with cheerful authority. "Wonderful news! Daniel is ready. He'll be taking over as CEO starting next week." My heart plummeted, a cold, sickening lurch in my stomach. Daniel! But years of navigating this family, this company, had taught me to mask my emotions. I forced a smile, raising my glass slightly. "That's quite the announcement, Dad." As if his words didn't pierce straight through 12 years of my life's work, 12 years of sacrifice and relentless effort. As if this wasn't a betrayal served alongside coffee and cake. If you've ever poured your heart into something only to be overlooked, hit subscribe on Life Stories. Let's talk about it. The dining room, moments before filled with celebratory chatter, seemed to hold its breath for a second, before erupting into polite, if slightly surprised, murmurs of congratulations directed solely at Daniel. I watched him lower his gaze, putting on a practiced show of humility, though I saw the flicker of triumph in his eyes. Daniel, my charming, aimless younger brother, who had spent the last decade drifting between failed tech startups, vaguely defined consulting gigs, and extended trips abroad, finding himself, all quietly subsidized by Dad, no doubt. Daniel, who found logistics boring and considered operations beneath him. Daniel, who showed up at the office maybe once a month for a photo op or to borrow petty cash. He was taking over. I gripped my wine glass, my knuckles white, needing the cool glass to anchor me. This wasn't just a company, it was my lifeblood. Sterling Logistics. My father, Richard, had started it when I was barely old enough to understand what logistics even meant. A modest regional trucking firm, perpetually struggling, barely staying afloat. I grew up watching him pour his life into it. The late nights hunched over ledgers, the missed school events, the constant stress chasing one more contract just to make payroll. Family vacations were a luxury we rarely afforded. When I graduated top of my class from business school 12 years ago, armed with fresh ideas and boundless energy, I practically had to beg him to let me join the company officially. He'd hesitated, muttering something about it being a tough business for a woman, but finally relented, likely assuming I'd last 6 months before retreating to a more suitable career path. He underestimated me then, just as he was underestimating me now. I hadn't just joined. I had transformed Sterling Logistics. I saw the potential he couldn't, the inefficiencies he ignored. I implemented cutting-edge tracking technology when he still relied on paper logs. I negotiated aggressive national contracts when he was content with local routes. I streamlined operations, built a killer sales team from scratch, expanded our services into warehousing and international freight forwarding. I navigated economic downturns and industry disruptions that would have sunk the old Sterling Logistics without a trace. What was once a small, perpetually struggling, nearly bankrupt firm was now a recognized industry leader, a sleek, efficient, profitable $75 million powerhouse. And I, Ava Sterling, had been the architect of that transformation. Every late night, every grueling negotiation, every strategic decision, that was me. And yet, here we were. My father, beaming with patriarchal pride, handing the reins to his unqualified son simply because he was the son. The murmurs of approval around the table continued, oblivious to the silent scream building inside me. I saw my mother cast a quick, unreadable glance my way from across the table. She knew. Unlike my father, She had seen the hours I poured in, the stress I carried, the sacrifices I made. But she wouldn't interfere. She never challenged Richard's decisions, especially regarding his precious son. She would offer quiet sympathy later, perhaps, but never public support. And then there was Daniel, meeting my gaze from across the table now, a barely concealed smirk playing on his lips. He wasn't just accepting this, he had actively sought it, waited for it, positioned himself carefully over the past year, suddenly showing interest in the company, shadowing Dad, playing the part of the prodigal son, finally ready to embrace his destiny. And my Fisher, ever the traditionalist, blinded by paternal pride and outdated notions of legacy, had bought the performance hook, line, and sinker. A son inherits the empire. A daughter builds it, manages it, saves it, and then, apparently, steps aside gracefully. A footnote. Temporary, no matter how much blood, sweat, and tears she invested. But they had both made a critical miscalculation. They saw me as the dutiful daughter, the hard-working manager, perhaps even the temporary savior. They didn't see the strategist. They didn't realize that while I was busy building the company's external success, I had also spent 12 years meticulously, quietly fortifying my own position within its very structure. And tomorrow morning, when they walked into my company expecting a smooth transition of power, they were going to learn exactly what that meant. Sleep was impossible that night. My mind raced, replaying my father's smiling announcement, Daniel's smug smirk, the polite, oblivious applause. Every sacrifice resurfaced. The missed weddings, the friendships that faded, the promising relationship that crumbled under the weight of 80-hour work weeks. I had poured my youth, my ambition, my entire identity into Sterling Logistics. And for what? To hand it over to my incompetent brother on a silver platter because of antiquated notions of succession? No. They had profoundly underestimated my resolve, my preparation, and my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. By 3 a.m., fueled by coffee and cold fury, I was in my home office, ensconced in the quiet glow of my monitors. My fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing secure files, reviewing documents I knew intimately. Every contract signed, every share allocation documented, every executive agreement codified. I knew the legal and financial bedrock of this company better than anyone, including my father, who had grown complacent, and Daniel, who had never bothered to learn. Daniel thought he was inheriting a kingdom. He didn't know the foundation was built on agreements he'd never seen, secured by clauses he couldn't comprehend. While Richard had been basking in the public glow of the company's success, and Daniel had been playing corporate dress-up, I had been methodically securing something far more tangible, far more powerful than a title: control. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I stepped through the gleaming glass doors of Sterling Logistics headquarters in downtown Chicago. The familiar hum of the building settling into the workday routine, the polished marble floors reflecting the morning light, the discreet efficiency of the reception area. It was all the same as it had been for the past 12 years. But today felt fundamentally different. Today, I wasn't just Ava Sterling, the driven executive who had steered this ship through rough waters. Today, I was walking into a battlefield of my own making. The atmosphere in the lobby was unusually subdued, thick with unspoken anticipation. The news of my father's announcement at the previous night's dinner had clearly spread like wildfire through the corporate grapevine. Employees I passed glanced up, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and nervous apprehension. They avoided direct eye contact, unsure where the power truly lay, unsure whose side to be on. I offered no reassurance, no acknowledgement of the tension. I walked with purpose, my heels clicking decisively on the marble, my posture erect, my expression calm and controlled. Never let them see you shaken. That had been my mantra for years. I reached my executive office, my office, the one I had earned, and shut the heavy oak door firmly behind me, enclosing myself in a pocket of quiet resolve. I glanced at the clock, 8:50 a.m. I had exactly 10 minutes before my father and Daniel were scheduled to arrive, presumably expecting a seamless handover, A compliant daughter, ready to brief her successor before fading gracefully into the background. 10 minutes before their carefully laid plans, their assumptions of power crumbled before their eyes. I sat down behind my large desk, took a single deep, steadying breath, and powered on my computer. The screen flickered to life, displaying the files I had prepared late last night. Ownership records, investment agreements, and the linchpin, the executive shareholders agreement. My hands hovered over the keyboard for just a second, a final moment of quiet determination, before I clicked the file open, ready. Right on schedule, at precisely 9:00 a.m., there was a sharp, authoritative knock on my door. I didn't bother responding. The door swung open regardless, and in walked Richard Sterling, my father, followed closely by Daniel, my brother. Both men exuded confidence. Richard's the ingrained assurance of a founder used to deference. Daniel's the carefully manufactured swagger of an heir apparent finally claiming his prize. My father strode in as if inspecting his kingdom, his gaze sweeping across the office he likely still considered his own. Daniel, dressed in an impeccably tailored, obviously expensive navy suit, offered me a smug, triumphant grin. It took every ounce of my self-control not to laugh in his face. "Ava," my father said, his tone brisk, authoritative, as if bestowing a great favor simply by acknowledging my presence. "Good. You're here. I assume you're fully aware of the leadership transition happening today." "Transition?" I repeated softly, leaning back slightly in my executive chair, meeting his gaze evenly. "An interesting choice of words. Yes, Dad, I'm aware of the announcement you made last night." "Good," he continued, nodding curtly, clearly expecting immediate compliance. "Daniel will be stepping in as the new chief executive officer, effective immediately. We'll need you to spend the next few weeks facilitating the handover, of course. Get him up to speed on current operations, key client accounts, ongoing projects. Before you officially move on." I arched a single eyebrow, letting a bead of silence hang in the air. "Move on?" I echoed, feigning polite confusion. "Dad... Daniel, I think you might be mistaken about something." My father's face twitched, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. He wasn't accustomed to being questioned, especially not by me. He was used to my quiet competence, my ability to anticipate his needs and execute his vision, often better than he could himself. He wasn't prepared for defiance. "Ava," he said, his voice tightening, adopting the condescending tone he used when explaining something simple to a child. "This isn't up for debate. The decision has been made. Daniel is taking over." I smiled then, a slow, deliberate, knowing smile that made the confidence falter slightly in both their eyes. "Oh, I know a decision was announced, Dad," I replied softly, my voice dangerously smooth. "The thing is, legally, you don't actually have the authority to make that decision unilaterally." Daniel let out a low, incredulous scoff, shaking his head. "Ava, come on! Don't make this difficult. We're trying to do this the easy way, for everyone's sake." I ignored him, reaching instead for the remote control on my desk. With a quiet click, the large flat-screen monitor mounted on my office wall sprang to life, displaying a scanned PDF document, the same one I had reviewed just minutes before. Executive Shareholders Agreement, Sterling Logistics, signed and dated August 17th, 2015. Signatories, Ava Sterling, Richard Sterling, Daniel Sterling. My father's face paled almost imperceptibly. Daniel frowned, clearly having no recollection of the document. I turned my chair slightly to face Daniel directly. "Daniel," I inquired sweetly, "do you even know what this document is?" He crossed his arms defensively, shifting uncomfortably under my direct gaze. "Looks like some kind of shareholders agreement?" he guessed vaguely. "Precisely," I nodded. "And do you happen recall its contents? Specifically," I used the remote to highlight a crucial clause on the screen, the text enlarging for emphasis, Section 4, Paragraph C. I didn't wait for an answer he obviously didn't have. This agreement was drafted and signed by all three of us 8 years ago during the major corporate restructuring required to secure our Series B funding, And this specific clause, I tapped the highlighted section, clearly stipulates that any transfer of executive power, including, and I quote, the appointment of a new chief executive officer, requires the unanimous written approval of all majority shareholders. I let the words hang in the air, then slowly turned my gaze to meet my father's stony expression. And as of the last official filing with the state, I continued calmly, my shareholding stands at 60%. 60%, Dad, making me the majority shareholder of Sterling Logistics. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My father's expression hardened, his jaw clenched tight. Daniel muttered, stepping closer to the screen to examine the document as if seeing it for the first time. That's impossible. Dad owns the company. Actually, I corrected him smoothly, it's very possible and entirely legal. You see, Daniel, over the past 12 years, while you were busy exploring other opportunities, and Dad was focused on being the public face of the company, I was doing something else. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the desk. I was securing my position, not just operationally, but structurally. I turned my attention back to my father, whose face was now a mask of controlled fury. Dad, remember 2017 when we desperately needed that capital infusion for the West Coast expansion and the banks were hesitant? You signed over an additional 15% of your shares to me personally in exchange for me leveraging my own assets to secure the loan. Remember that? His lips thinned, but he didn't deny it. And in 2019, I pressed on relentlessly, during that protracted, expensive legal battle with our competitor, remember how another 10% of your shares were transferred to my name as collateral against potential damages? Collateral which, I added pointedly, you never bothered to formally reclaim once the suit was settled in our favor. I leaned back in my chair again. That 15%, plus that 10%, added to my original 35% stake granted when I initially joined and invested, brings my total holding to 60%, making me the majority shareholder with controlling interest. Daniel was openly panicking now, rifling through the papers on my desk as if hoping to find a contradictory document. You have to be bluffing, he spat, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. I calmly pulled out a second document, a certified copy of the most recent corporate filing with the Secretary of State, clearly listing the current share distribution. Want to verify? Daniel snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning it frantically, his face draining of all color with each passing second. You can't do this, he finally stammered, turning pleadingly to our father. Dad, tell her she can't just take the company. But my father remained silent, rigid, staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and perhaps grudging respect. Because he knew. He knew I had played by the rules he had agreed to years ago, likely assuming they would never truly matter. He knew I had legally, meticulously outmaneuvered him, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it now. I exhaled slowly, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to subside, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I stood up from behind my desk, asserting my physical presence in the room, mirroring the shift in power. I'm not firing you, Daniel, I said, my voice steady, professional. I wouldn't stoop to his level of petty cruelty. Frankly, I wouldn't want to force you into the actual competitive job market unprepared. A small, humorless smile touched my lips. But, I continued, my tone hardening, things are going to change, drastically. You will no longer be CEO, effective immediately. That appointment is null and void without my consent as majority shareholder. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. However, I am willing to offer you a position. I paused, letting the unexpected offer hang in the air. You can stay on at Sterling Logistics in a senior advisory role, focusing on new business development, perhaps. Your salary will be generous, commensurate with an executive title. But, I emphasized, locking eyes with him, you will have limited operational authority, and you will report directly to me, Those are the terms. Daniel stiffened, indignation warring with panic on his face. Or, I continued smoothly, turning my gaze briefly to my father before focusing back on my brother, you can choose option B. You can walk away. I will buy out your minority shares, the ones Dad gifted you over the years, at fair market value, based on the latest independent valuation. You can take the money, likely a substantial sum thanks to my efforts in growing this company, and find a new project to sink your teeth into. Perhaps one you're actually passionate about this time. My father scoffed then, finding his voice, though it was strained. You're acting like you hold all the cards, Ava. I met his gaze evenly, unflinchingly. Because I do, Dad. The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken resentment and the harsh reality of the situation. Daniel looked utterly lost, stripped of the entitlement that had defined his entire life. My father looked weary, defeated, the weight of his miscalculation settling heavily upon him. Finally, my father broke the silence, his voice quiet, almost resigned. You're making a mistake, Ava, he said, though the words lacked conviction. A family should stick together, support each other. Do you really want to burn this bridge? Destroy what we built? I felt a sharp pang at his words, the appeal to family loyalty, the implication that I was the one destroying things. But the wound was too deep, the betrayal too recent. Dad, I replied slowly, keeping my voice steady. With all due respect, you burned this bridge. You burned it the moment you decided, without discussion, without consideration, for 12 years of my work, that Daniel should inherit what I built. You made your choice then. This, I gestured around the office, encompassing the company itself, is the consequence. His lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Business is bigger than just one person, Ava. He tried again, attempting a different tack. This isn't personal. We can find a solution that works for everyone involved. I tilted my head slightly, feigning thoughtful consideration. Oh, I agree, Dad. Business is bigger than one person's ego or sense of entitlement. That's precisely why I'm offering you both a clear choice right now. A choice that prioritizes the stability and continued success of Sterling logistics rather than family politics. I turned back to Daniel. So, Daniel, what's it going to be? Advisor under my leadership, or a clean break with a generous payout? Daniel looked wildly at our father, eyes pleading for intervention, for rescue, for the familiar safety net that had always caught him before. But for the first time in Daniel's life, my father had no answer, no quick fix, no way to smooth things over and make it all go away. Because this wasn't his company to control anymore. It was mine. With a strangled cry of frustration and impotent rage, Daniel threw the legal document he was still clutching onto my desk. Fine, he spat. Fine, I'm out. I wouldn't work for you anyway. And with that, he stormed out of my office, slamming the door hard behind him. Good riddance, I thought, a sense of weary relief washing over me. I knew my brother. He would posture, he would complain. He would undoubtedly run to our relatives and family friends, weaving a tale of corporate betrayal and sisterly ruthlessness. Let him. I wasn't playing for their approval anymore. I was playing for my future. My father lingered for a moment longer, his shoulders slumped, the fight seemingly gone out of him. He looked around the office, at the company he had started, the company I had saved and grown, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. He seemed to be waiting, perhaps for me to relent, to offer an olive branch, to backtrack. When I remained silent, simply watching him, he finally gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. You've changed, Ava, he murmured quietly, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. I met his gaze, holding it steady. No, Dad, I replied softly but firmly. I just finally stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't. He held my gaze for another long moment, then turned and walked out of the office, closing the door quietly behind him, leaving me alone in the silence. I sank back down into my chair, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. I should have felt victorious. I had faced them down, asserted my rightful control, protected everything I had worked for. I had won. But as I stared at the empty doorway where my father and brother had just stood, the victory felt hollow. A quiet, lingering ache settled in my chest. A small, foolish part of me, the part that still craved paternal approval after all these years, had desperately hoped that building this $75 million company would finally be enough. That my success would finally make him see me, not just his daughter, but his equal, his capable successor. But the truth, laid bare in his actions, was that he had never truly looked, never truly seen past his own biases and expectations. And now? Now he had no choice but to see me for what I really was. Not the temporary stand-in, not just his daughter, but the undisputed leader of Sterling Logistics. I turned back to my computer, my focus shifting immediately to the tasks ahead. The internal politics were far from over. The battle for control might be won, but the war for stability and respect had just begun. I had spent 12 years building this company. Now, I would spend the next 12 making it untouchable, securing its future, my future. My father and brother had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, ironically, they were the ones who had truly lost everything. The silence in my executive suite in the days following the confrontation felt profoundly different. For the first time in 12 years, the phone didn't ring constantly with calls from my father seeking updates or giving unsolicited advice. No passive-aggressive emails from Daniel questioning my decisions landed in my inbox. It was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the eerie calm before a storm. I knew my father, Richard, wouldn't simply fade away quietly. He had built this company, and his pride was deeply entangled with it. And Daniel, his bruised ego and sense of entitlement, wouldn't allow him to accept defeat gracefully. I wasn't naive enough to think the boardroom showdown was the end of it. It was merely the end of the first act. By the next morning, the counterattack began, just as I'd anticipated. It wasn't overt, not yet. It was subtle, insidious, the classic whisper network kicking into high gear. I could feel the shift in the office atmosphere. Employees who had seemed relieved by Daniel's departure last week now averted their gaze, offering hesitant smiles. Department heads who had previously sought my strategic input suddenly became too busy for meetings. The whispers reached me through trusted allies. Richard was making calls to old family friends on the board of directors, expressing concerns about my aggressive tactics and lack of collaborative spirit. Daniel, playing the role of the wounded victim to perfection, was apparently having tearful lunches with senior executives, lamenting his sister's ruthless ambition and how I had stolen his birthright, conveniently omitting the fact that he had no legal claim and even less competence. They were trying to sow seeds of doubt, painting me as cold, disloyal, unstable, unfit to lead the company I had single-handedly built into a success. It was a calculated campaign to undermine my authority, to poison the well with the board and key stakeholders, hoping to create enough internal pressure to force me out, or at the very least, make my leadership untenable. If they couldn't beat me legally, they would try to destroy my reputation. I wasn't about to let that happen. I wouldn't engage in their mudslinging, but I wouldn't sit back passively either. That afternoon, I scheduled an emergency all-hands executive meeting for the following morning. No agenda provided, just a mandatory summons. Let them wonder, let the tension build. As I stepped into the main boardroom the next day, the air was thick with nervous energy. The senior VPs, the department heads, the key strategists, they were all there, seated around the long, polished table. Half of them avoided my gaze entirely. The other half watched me with unnerving intensity, waiting for me to show weakness, waiting for me to falter. I took my rightful seat at the head of the table, my seat now, and let the silence stretch for a moment, meeting the eyes of each person around the room. "Let's not waste time on pleasantries," I began, my voice calm, even, projecting confidence I didn't entirely feel but knew was essential. "I'm aware there have been conversations, discussions happening behind closed doors, over expensive lunches, perhaps in hushed voices during after-work drinks. I let my gaze linger on a few specific executives known to be close to my father. Several shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I'm also aware, I continued, that the nature of the recent leadership clarification has caused some speculation, and that some of you, I paused again, letting the weight of my words sink in, may be wondering about the stability and future direction of Sterling Logistics under my sole leadership. A few people tensed visibly. No one dared to speak. So, I tapped my fingers lightly on the table. Let's clear the air right now, shall we? With a click of the remote, the large screen behind me illuminated with a concise presentation. Not opinions, not accusations, but cold, hard facts. Charts, graphs, financial data. Sterling Logistics, I stated clearly, is not in crisis. Quite the opposite. I walked them through the numbers, highlighting key metrics. Over the last 5 years, under my direct strategic leadership as COO and de facto head of operations, this company has seen a 300% increase in net revenue. We have successfully expanded into 6 new national markets, tripled our fleet efficiency through technology integration I personally spearheaded, and secured long-term contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. I turned to Mark Reynolds, our CFO, who sat stoically near the end of the table. Mark, based on all current financial indicators and market projections, is there any objective data whatsoever suggesting this company is financially unstable or performing poorly under my leadership? Mark Reynolds, a pragmatic numbers man with little patience for internal politics, hesitated only for a second before shaking his head firmly. No, Ava. Absolutely not. In fact, our Q4 projections, based on contracts already secured, show anticipated growth exceeding 20% year over year. I nodded slowly, turning back to face the room. Thank you, Mark. So let's be perfectly honest about what this current uncertainty is truly about. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table, my voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its firmness. My father and my brother aren't concerned because the company is struggling. They aren't questioning my leadership because I'm failing to deliver results. They are upset, I stated bluntly, because their plan, based on entitlement rather than merit, failed. They expected me to quietly step aside and hand over control of a $75 million company to someone with a proven track record of failure, simply because of his last name. And I refused. The room remained utterly silent, every eye fixed on me. Then, I delivered the final decisive blow. I am also aware, I said, my voice dangerously quiet now, that some individuals in this room have been contacted directly by Richard or Daniel Sterling within the last 24 to 48 hours. Contacted, perhaps, and offered certain incentives, assurances, maybe promises of future advancement, in exchange for actively supporting a motion to question my leadership or push for my resignation at the next board meeting. I let my gaze sweep slowly around the table again, pausing on those I suspected. A few people visibly paled. Others stared determinedly at their notepads. If anyone here, I continued calmly, received such a communication and would like to disclose it now, ensuring their continued loyalty to Sterling Logistics and its actual leadership, this would be the opportune moment. A long, tense silence stretched. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, after what felt like an eternity, one of the senior VPs, a man known for his cautious pragmatism, cleared his throat nervously. Ava, he admitted reluctantly. I did receive a call yesterday evening, from Richard. He hesitated. He suggested he was considering making an official appeal to the board regarding the transition. He implied there might be future opportunities for those who supported a return to stability. I nodded slowly, unsurprised. Thank you for your honesty, Robert. And did he offer anything more concrete in return for your support? Robert flushed slightly, but gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. There it was. Confirmation. My father built the foundations of this company, I said then, standing up, my voice resonating with quiet power. I respect that history, but I built this company into what it is today. I took it further than he ever imagined possible, and I will not stand by and allow him or my brother to manipulate it, undermine it, or destroy it from the outside through petty grievances and backroom deals. I let my voice drop again, low and controlled, but unmistakably dangerous. If they want a fight, they will get one. A public one, if necessary. One that Sterling Logistics, under my leadership, is fully prepared to win. I gathered my presentation notes, looking directly at each executive around the table one last time. If anyone here believes my father and brother deserve control of this company after their recent actions, if anyone feels their loyalty lies elsewhere, now is the time to make your move. Tender your resignation. Silence. Utter, complete silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Good, I said curtly. Then I turned and walked out of the boardroom, my head held high, leaving them to contemplate the new reality. The internal battle was won for now, but I knew the war wasn't over. My father and brother wouldn't give up easily. Their next move, likely, would be to take the fight public. Fine, let them. That night, I made my own call. Not to a board member, not to an investor, but to an old contact, a sharp investigative journalist at a major financial publication known for her tenacity and her ability to dig deep. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "it's Ava Sterling. I think I might have a story for you, a rather compelling one about succession, legacy, and the hidden truths behind a family-run empire." I had made my move. Now it was their turn, and I was waiting, fully prepared for whatever came next. The morning after my calculated leak to the investigative journalist, my personal phone and company inbox exploded. Emails, voicemails, text messages flooded in from board members, major investors, industry analysts, and journalists from every major financial news outlet. The narrative I had carefully controlled internally was now beginning to ripple outwards, but the questions were cautious. Is the rumored family dispute true? What is the status of Richard Sterling's involvement? Can you comment on succession plans? I instructed my communications team to issue a brief, neutral holding statement acknowledging ongoing discussions regarding leadership structure, but emphasizing business as usual and reaffirming confidence in our strong performance metrics. I knew my father and Daniel wouldn't stay silent for long. They needed to control the public narrative to have any hope of regaining leverage or saving face. Sure enough, by noon that day, their counterattack arrived in the form of a carefully crafted press release distributed widely. It was a masterpiece of corporate spin filled with vague platitudes and subtle digs. Sterling Logistics has always been, at its heart, a family-run business built on values of loyalty and smooth transitions, it read. We are saddened by recent internal disagreements regarding the future leadership path, but remain committed to upholding the legacy Richard Sterling established. Changes in leadership are sometimes necessary, and we hope to navigate this transition smoothly, ensuring stability for our employees and stakeholders as we move forward. It didn't name me directly as the problem, but the implication was clear. Ava is the source of the disagreement. Ava is disrupting stability. Ava is not respecting the family legacy. They were painting me as the rogue element, the ruthless daughter prioritizing ambition over family harmony. It was predictable, infuriating, but ultimately exactly what I had anticipated. I watched the financial news channels that afternoon as analysts debated the situation. A classic succession battle, one commentator declared. Can Ava maintain control amidst this family turmoil? Another questioned. Will her perceived aggressive takeover damage investor confidence? They dissected my career, questioned my motives, speculated about my relationship with my father, all based on the carefully planted seeds of doubt from Richard and Daniel's camp. They talked as if I wasn't watching, as if I didn't have a countermove already in play. If they wanted a public war fought through headlines and sound bites, then so be it. But I wasn't going to fight with spin. I was going to fight with facts. I didn't release a competing statement immediately. I didn't grant interviews rebutting their claims. Instead, I waited for the investigative journalist I'd contacted, Sarah Jenkins, to finish her work. I had given her everything. Internal audits I'd commissioned years ago, detailing financial irregularities under my father's sole leadership. Documents showing questionable vendor contracts he'd approved that benefited personal friends. Evidence of high staff turnover due to his management style before I took over operations, juxtaposed with the company's documented recovery and exponential growth trajectory directly correlated with my increasing responsibilities. The story broke 24 hours later, featured prominently in the Wall Street Journal, and quickly picked up by other major outlets. The headline was brutal. Behind the Sterling success story, a legacy of hidden debts and daughter's turnaround. The meticulously researched article laid bare the truth. It detailed my father's near-bankrupting mismanagement in the company's earlier years, the risky financial maneuvers he'd made, the creative accounting that had masked underlying problems I had spent my first 5 years at the company quietly, painstakingly fixing. It contrasted his tenure with the company's verifiable financial health, market expansion, and industry reputation built under my operational leadership. It didn't paint me as an angel, but it painted me as competent, strategic, and the driving force behind Sterling Logistics' $75 million valuation. It painted Richard as a founder who had lost his touch, and implicitly, Daniel as an unqualified heir attempting to claim a throne he hadn't earned. The impact was immediate and devastating for them. The narrative flipped overnight. Board members, who had been wavering, now issued statements affirming their confidence in my leadership. Investors who had expressed caution reiterated their support. Industry analysts revised their commentary, now framing the story as one of meritocracy versus nepotism, competence versus entitlement. My father and brother, who had likely expected to control the media narrative through their established connections, found themselves silenced, their reputations tarnished by documented facts. They had nowhere left to hide. 2 days later, my father called me. His voice wasn't angry this time, just flat, weary. "Ava," he began, skipping any preamble. "We need to talk about the terms of my retirement." I leaned back in my chair, the tension finally, truly beginning to dissipate. "Do we?" I asked quietly. A long silence, then a sigh. "You didn't have to do that, Ava, airing everything publicly." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "Neither did you, Dad. You started the public battle with that press release." "This company? It was supposed to be a legacy," he said, his voice filled with a gravelly sadness. "For the family, for Daniel, for you too, eventually." I felt a familiar pang, that old longing for a shared dream that never materialized, but it was overlaid now with the harsh clarity of experience. "Dad," I said softly but firmly, "if you genuinely wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it years ago. Instead, you tried to take it away the moment it suited you." Another long silence stretched between Chicago and wherever he was calling from. "What happens now?" he asked finally, the question sounding almost reluctant. I exhaled slowly. "Now? Now I run the company, and I ensure this never happens again." The war was over. My father formally announced his retirement the following week. He sold the majority of his remaining shares back to the company, at a price dictated by the board, now firmly aligned with me, keeping only a small symbolic percentage as a passive investor. He retreated from the public eye. Daniel took the buyout I had initially offered, a generous sum, but far less than the CEO position he craved, and disappeared, rumored to be trying his luck with another venture capital-funded startup somewhere out west. Good luck to him. With undisputed control, I began truly implementing my vision for Sterling Logistics. The cautious executives who had hesitated were replaced with dynamic leaders who shared my drive for innovation. We invested heavily in sustainable practices my father had dismissed as too expensive. We expanded aggressively into international markets he had been too risk-averse to explore. We fostered a corporate culture based on transparency, merit, and respect, the antithesis of the old guard's nepotism and backroom deals. Within 6 months, profits soared beyond projections. Within a year, Sterling Logistics crossed the $100 million valuation mark. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove my worth or defend my position. I was simply leading, building, creating something undeniable, something untouchable, something mine. A year after the dust settled, almost to the day, my father requested we have dinner. I hesitated, then agreed, meeting him at a quiet, neutral restaurant downtown. He looked different, quieter, smaller somehow, the bluff confidence replaced by a weary acceptance. He didn't try to rehash the past, didn't offer excuses. We talked awkwardly about the weather, about industry trends. Then, over his drink, he looked at me directly. "I read about the new aerospace logistics deal you closed," he said. "Impressive. Smart move." I merely smirked slightly. "I know." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There was no lingering tension, no resentment bubbling beneath the surface. The war was long over. He lifted his glass slightly. "To Sterling Logistics," he said quietly. I clinked my glass against his. This time, I felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet, settled peace. I had already won. I didn't need his belated acknowledgement to know it. As I sit in my office today, the Chicago skyline stretching out before me, the thriving hum of my company buzzing around me, I sometimes reflect on that tumultuous period. Family can be your fiercest ally or your most dangerous opponent. Loyalty, I learned, is earned, not inherited. Power is never simply given. It must be secured, often defended. But perhaps the most crucial lesson was this. The surest way to prove your worth is to stop seeking external validation altogether, and instead, build something so undeniably strong, so successful on its own terms, that they can never, ever ignore you again. I have no regrets. Sterling Logistics is mine, and I intend to keep it that way. Ava Sterling's story is a gripping tale of ambition, betrayal, and strategic brilliance in the high-stakes world of family business. After dedicating 12 years to transforming Sterling Logistics from a struggling firm into a $75 million success, she faced the ultimate betrayal when her father announced her inexperienced brother, Daniel, would take over as CEO. This act of blatant nepotism, however, underestimated Ava's foresight and preparation. Having quietly secured majority ownership through past agreements her father and brother overlooked, Ava skillfully turned the tables, exposing their incompetence and asserting her rightful control. When faced with a subsequent sabotage campaign and public relations attack, she didn't just defend. She strategically went on the offensive, using documented facts to expose past mismanagement under her father's leadership, thereby solidifying her own reputation as the company's true savior and visionary leader. This narrative provides powerful lessons on the importance of understanding corporate structures, contracts, and shareholder rights, especially within family businesses where emotions often cloud judgment. It highlights the stark contrast between leadership earned through merit and competence versus power granted through entitlement. Ava's journey underscores the necessity of strategic planning, meticulous documentation, and decisive action when facing internal threats. Ultimately, it's a story about resilience, the courage to fight for what you've built, and the sometimes painful realization that achieving professional success might require severing the toxic family ties and forging your own path, defined not by inherited legacy, but by earned achievement. Thank you for watching Ava's incredible story of corporate maneuvering and resilience on Lifestories1. What would you have done in her position? Let us know in the comments. Please remember to like this video and subscribe for more stories of overcoming challenges and achieving success against the odds. Know your contracts and own your success. Until next time.